Welcome to Land of the Bible. I'm your host, David Sussman. This week, we're going to learn about the story of the siege of Masada. In the heart of the Judean desert, where the mountains meet the shores of the Dead Sea, stands one of the most legendary strongholds in history, Masada, a fortress built by King Herod, a palace of unimaginable luxury, and most famously, the site of a dramatic last stand that has echoed through the ages. Few places in the world hold a story as powerful as Masada, a story of courage, faith, and an unbreakable spirit. I'm David Sussman, and on this episode of Land of the Bible, we'll journey into the heart of Masada, uncover the secrets of its dramatic past, and learn about the archaeology and preservation that brings this incredible history to life.
Welcome to the Northern Palace at Masada. Herod built on top of the mountain in the northern ridge, on the side of the mountain, a three-tiered palace. And this is just one of them. What's so special about this palace? Well, first of all, the engineering behind it to bring in the people, the technology of the time, was amazing that they were able to build foundational walls on the side of a cliff to then eventually build a three-tiered palace where Herod's own private quarters were up here, with a view over everything in the Jordan Valley, looking over the Dead Sea towards En-Gedi in the north. The second level for distinguished guests coming from the Roman Empire. When they came here, he brought them across and gave them their own special quarters. And of course, finally, the banquet hall. Down here, this elaborate, beautiful banquet hall with frescoes, pilasters. It even had its own water and bathing sauce so that during the meal, if you felt like you needed to refresh yourself, you could come out without having to go all the way back up to the top and get a dunk in the nice, fresh, cold water in the middle of the desert. Very few places around the world that you're going to see such an amazing feat of engineering that 2,000 years later is still standing. Here we are in one of Herod's rooms, in his private palace. As you can see, this mosaic is very geometrical. Herod put no graven images on any of his mosaics or any of his works. Not the frescoes, not the floors, not the walls, nothing. Showing us his Jewish roots and Jewish identity. Here you see the kind of work, the intricate tesserae, all these little blocks that are used like Lego. To be able to afford something like this shows us that this is from the high society. Just close your eyes for a minute and imagine walking on this beautiful mosaic floor when your servants are serving you cold water and fish from the Mediterranean Sea brought across the country through the desert so that you can eat as if you were in Rome itself. One of the other reasons Herod used this mountaintop, this plateau, as a fortress was because of its strategic, natural defense system. As you look to the north, to the east, to the west, you have sheer cliffs. On the south, it's just as steep, if not deeper. This particular site was so well naturally defended that even when Herod built his casemate walls, 2-3 meters high, that's almost 10 feet in height, from here up, it was virtually impossible to get through, and anybody living up here was 100% safe, especially when you take into account everything around you is at a lower height. It was the perfect position on the border of the southern region of Judea to their neighbors in the south and to the east, which is today Jordan and Saudi Arabia. So let's talk a little bit about the water. It's such a crucial part of our lives, even more so when you're standing in the middle of the Judean desert on a mountaintop. So there were two major sources of water for Masada. The first one being En-Gedi. Now it's about 11 miles north of us. If you look over in the distance, you can see the green clump of trees. That's approximately where En-Gedi is, just on the north of that. It's about 18 kilometers from here. On the road below us, you can see a path that was trodden by horses and donkeys. It's still there today and used by people for hiking. And they came up to the water gate, which there were a few of, all day, every day except the Sabbath. Herod had donkeys and horses carrying leather pouches full of fresh, sweet water being brought from the morning to the evening to Masada. That's one of them. However, what about when it does rain in those few months a year in the middle of the desert, in this harsh climate of Israel? Well, on the western side of Masada, above the camp from Flavius Silva, there is another mountain. When the rain falls around Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem, towards Hebron, Bethlehem, and those southern mountains of Judea, the rain actually comes down to the Jordan Valley. Anything that falls east of that rain line, that rain shadow line, will come down here. Everything west will go to the Mediterranean. Herod knew how to capture this. He was a brilliant engineer and hydrologist. Whether it was him or the people that he took from Rome, they were able to build diagonal walls to absorb the pressure of the flash flooding. From there, they were able to direct the water to channels. Those channels then led into aqueducts, which with the use of gravity went down the steep cliff valley, back up again to the side of the mountain where Herod had dug out more than 50,000, some say possibly 300,000 cubic liters of fresh, sweet water. And that's just what's in the cisterns below. Then you had a minimum of 10 to 15,000 cubic liters of what they brought on top of the mountain. It's just mind-blowing. But what about Herod himself? Why would he need to build such a thing so far away from, well, Jerusalem, for instance, the capital where the temple was? Let's go talk about that now, because we're going to get into a little bit of the psyche of who was Herod. What a lot of people don't understand about Herod is where the paranoia comes from. You see, Herod's family was actually a converted family. During the Maccabean period, the Hasmonean period, when forced conversion happened, Herod's grandfather actually was one of those people that converted. Herod's family was very involved with administration and government, and they knew how to mingle with the higher part of society. When Herod's grandfather, Antipater, converted to Judaism, he continued this, however, now not with the Idumeans or the Greeks, but with the Jewish Hasmonean rule. When the Romans took over the area in minus 67 or 67 BCE, then they were still involved, and they continued to stay involved in the upper levels of government and administration. Herod, being born into this family, already had privilege. He was a governor of northern Israel, northern Judea. Later on, he became the governor in Judea after his brother, and the Romans made him king of Judea. So unlike our other kings in the Jewish history, like David or Saul or Solomon or Hezekiah, who were anointed by prophets, Herod's kingship was given to him by the Roman rulers. Because of his conversion and because of the way he ascended to the throne, he was not very accepted by the Jewish people. It made him a very paranoid man. With possible threats from within and without throughout the entire almost 4 decades that Herod ruled as king of Judea, the paranoia never stopped. He didn't trust his brothers, his wives, his inside circle, And of course, he definitely didn't trust the neighbors in the region, such as the Parthians or the Edomites, who were mortal enemies of the Roman Empire. This is another reason which led Herod to build such a lavish, extravagant, and secure fortress on the border of southern Judea. The wall behind me is a perfect example of how Herod separated himself from the rest of the community. In front of that wall is the northern palace, which we just visited. Behind you is the rest of Masada. This is just one example of everything that Herod did to show that his megalomania, his ego, and his paranoia were major reasons to why and how he designed his buildings. And the fact that even though he wasn't going to be around, he wanted to make sure that his buildings and achievements remained forever. And that's why we see so many of Herod's buildings all over Israel today, with Masada being probably the most unique and the most sustained, and most importantly, the most preserved and rebuilt out of all of Herod's sites.
Imagine walking where Jesus walked, where faith comes to life. Feel the Bible story unfold around you, from the green Galilee to Jerusalem's ancient streets. Experience the serene and welcoming land of the Bible, where miracles happen. Put your heart where His footsteps are. Visit Israel.
By 66 CE, the oppressive Roman rule was so bad that all of the Jews united to rise up and revolt against them. It was called the Great Revolt, and it would continue for up to 7 years until it ended here in Masada, the final place, the final stand. What's so relevant about this is that this revolt ended up causing the destruction of Herod's temple, the Second Temple, and the dispersion of the Jews in the diaspora. And this site is going to be the final stand for Jewish independence and sovereignty for 2,000 years, until the Jews come back in the modern period, re-establish the state of Israel, the sovereignty, and the return of the Jews to their homeland. By the time the revolt happened in 66 CE, the Jewish people in Judea were separated into a number of different sects, different factions. The main ones that you probably heard of were the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Saducees, the Sadducees, as well as the Sicarii, also known as the Zealots. The Zealots actually are what we're going to talk about now, because what happened during this period is that they came down here seeking refuge, and the small Roman garrison that was stationed here on the southern border of Judea was overtaken and conquered by the Zealots. What it also provided, though, was a safe haven for the refugees who actually successfully managed to escape from the destruction and the devastation that was Jerusalem in 70 CE. Once the refugees got up here, after their initial respite, they realized that up here on top of the mountain of Masada was a safe haven. It was a refuge site. So therefore, they started to rebuild their lives, their communities. They rebuilt homes to allow themselves, their families, and other refugees accommodation. From here on in, the safe haven that they created provided them with a sense of security, and they were able to live here for a couple of years, if not longer. How were almost 1,000 refugees and zealots able to survive for so long in this harsh desert? Well, let's go explore that now. Follow me. Welcome to one of the storage rooms. There's almost 2,000 of these storage rooms here on top of Masada, each one being over 100 square meters in size. That's over 300 square feet for those that don't know metric. It's huge. This is just one of them. What did he store here? Well, we know for a fact that they stored grains, fruits, vegetables, water, oil, enough supplies here that they were able to have enough food and water to go 2, possibly even 3 years without needing to resupply. That's a huge feat, considering that in today's time, it takes me over an hour to drive to Jerusalem, probably the nearest big city that I can think of. So now we're here, totally filled with food, and the zealots were able to take advantage of that. By conquering the hill, by taking the fortress, by defeating the Roman garrison here, they took control also of the water and the food supplies. And this is why, for years, they were able to be here before the Romans, and Flavius Silva finally made it over here to squash the revolt and the last stages of the Jewish Great Revolt against the Romans. One of the most amazing things I want to share with you guys is that one of the date seeds that they found was replanted in a kibbutz down south in the Arava called Ketorah. You can go there and see it today. It's near Eilat. And this seed that they planted, not only did it grow, but it's also starting to reproduce. This is phenomenal, guys. 2,000 years later, we're able to grow a date palm from the time of the Second Temple and the time of Herod to see exactly the type of dates that they ate 2,000 years ago, and that was found right here on top of Masada. Amazing stuff. Let's go check out the rest of it. Wow, look where we are, folks. This is amazing. This is unbelievable. I am standing in the oldest synagogue probably in the world. 2,000 years old. It was rebuilt by the Zealots when they conquered over the Romans. They used this place as a prayer hall. They used this place to read the Torah 3 times a week to the public, and they also used it for congregations and meeting places. Here they would strategize what's going on a day-to-day level, who's responsible for what chores and tasks to keep the community alive and thriving, and also to discuss and strategize against the Romans who were still ruling and the revolt was still happening. The temple may have been destroyed, but the Jewish people are still alive. We're still here. And this is the place that they decided to discuss where and how they were going to fight up against the Romans, what might actually be the last stand of Jewish independence. I'm now standing on the western ridge of Masada, the side of the Roman siege ramp. This was the side that the Romans came in from because strategically and topographically, it was a lot simpler and easier than coming in from the eastern side on the Valley of the Dead Sea itself. When Silva got here with his troops, the goal was to end the revolt against the Romans. The Romans had had enough. They wanted to be done with the revolt. They wanted to put down the Judeans and the Jewish people and move on with ruling the world. What they did here is the same sort of strategy they used any city or town that they sieged. They would first of all build a circumvallation wall, which literally means a wall that circumnavigated the entire site, in this case the mountain. You can still see remains of that wall on the ground in front of the camp, as if somebody sprinkled dirt and dust on the ground. The walls were destroyed over the years with earthquakes, not by people. Where you see the line of the wall was the original line of this circumvallation wall that the Romans built. First thing they did was stop people coming in and stop people from coming out. Then they destroyed any inlets for water supply and food supply. Then they built their camps all around so they could keep an eye on the people that they were sieging, in this case, the Zealots, and the end of the Jewish revolt. There were 8 camps that surrounded the entire mountain of Masada. The largest camp there behind me was General Flavius Silva's camp. Inside of that camp, there's a mini camp, and that was the general's camp within the camp. It took the Romans approximately 6 months with thousands of slaves, Jewish and not Jewish, that they'd brought with them to build the ramp that you see below me here. Tons and tons and tons of rocks, and stone and dirt and sand and wood were used to build this ramp, bucket after bucket after bucket, until eventually 6-7 months later, the Romans got to the top of the wall. This is what's left of the ramp. This is actually the largest Roman siege ramp still intact in the world. This is how the Romans managed to get up to the height of these walls, over 1,000 feet above sea level. So here we have a perfect example, one of the best in the entire world, of how a Roman siege looked, how it worked, and how effective it was for something that was 2,000 years ago, without the modern warfare and technology that we have today. The Jewish people living up here, the zealots and the rebels and the refugees, could have stayed up here for 2, maybe even 3 years. There was that much food and water supplied here, just like we discussed earlier in the storage room. Even though we're in the middle of nowhere, the amount of resources that was used to squash the revolt against the Romans was immense. Now that the Romans had finally completed the siege ramp, this was the beginning of the end of the Roman siege. This was the point where they were able to breach the wall. Now that they had the height to get there, what we're going to go do now is go and check out the breach in the wall that essentially led to the end of the siege. Come on, let's go. And here we are, guys, at the breach in the wall. Come check this out. Wow, look at this view. This is amazing. From up here, at the point of the breach, we can see the Roman siege ramp downstairs behind us. We can also see the main camp of Flavius Silva, the general, the commander of the Roman legions at the time. And we can see the dramatic cliff of the height that Masada offers as a fortress. This was the point where the Romans finally came through. But what you don't know is that the Romans had already broken through the walls, these double casemate walls that Herod had built and the zealots had fortified. Once the Romans originally broke through the wall, the people living up here, the survivors and the refugees, dismantled the ceiling and the beams they used to support their ceilings to rebuild the wall in this spot. And by doing that, then they filled the middle of it with pebbles and sand and rocks and dirt, so that every time the Roman siege ramp, the battering ram, smashed against the wall, it compressed the dirt more and more. Think like you're filling a salt shaker. How you bang the bottom, it gets more compressed. Same idea. Then the Romans decided to shoot firing arrows at the wooden wall. The Jews weren't gonna be worried about this. They had so much water up here that they started wetting all the wood. And then finally, the wood burnt enough that it dried out and started to burn, and the wind changed. The wind went from an east to west and started to burn the siege ramp. That was right here, right in front of my face at that point. Then they thought they were saved. Finally, the salvation that the zealots were looking for was happening. Apparently God had other plans, because the wind changed direction again and threw back towards the east direction, back onto the makeshift wall that the zealots had built, and finally the wall itself started to burn. However, when they came in, all they got was silence. And that is when the Romans discovered every person dead. The mass suicide that occurred here, still today, 2,000 years later, is a significant and vital part of our history. They chose death over slavery, death over bondage. However, that death was the last stand of Jewish sovereignty, because after this event, when Masada fell, the Jews would not have their independence again until 1948, when the modern state of Israel was reestablished.
I will bless those who bless you, God promised Abraham. Embrace this covenant by connecting with the people of Israel. From Jerusalem's stones to Galilee's shores, experience living faith through their traditions and hospitality. Your journey is more than visiting biblical sites. It's about hearts that welcome your friendship Your presence matters. Discover Israel.
Here are the original ostraca that they found upstairs when the last 10 pulled the lots to figure out who was going to be the last one. We look around here and we see the names. And what we find here is the name of Elazar ben Yair, the head of the Zealots, the head of the Sicarii, showing us and providing us with proof that the stories that we read from Josephus Flavius have some truth to them, because here we have physical, scientific, archaeological evidence that the people existed. And if the people existed, then we have to provide some sort of belief that the stories written about them are also true. This is amazing. The fact that we find them here, unbelievable.
The old city of Jerusalem, a city which history spans over 3,000 years, since the days of King David. If only these walls could speak. Join me in this week's episode of The Land of the Bible. Wow! Thanks for being with us. Make sure to join us next time as we connect you to the people, places, and land of the Bible.